The longest running rivalry in NBA history involves Michael Jordan and Isiah Thomas. It spanned 30 plus years, it's seen 7 presidents, and numerous dynasties rise and fall during this time period. Everyone knows Isiah and MJ, they despise each other, and their rivalry at this point will never end. And for today's video, we're going to listen to a LeBron James fan break down MJ versus Isiah Thomas. As in a very small and condensed 50-second YouTube short, this LeBron James fan contorts logic, he lies constantly, and as you can imagine, slants things in negative light for Michael Jordan.
There's a reason Jordan has such disgust for Isiah. Isiah's the only guy from his era that kind of has something over him. So Bird always beat Jordan in the playoffs, but nobody looked at that as a fair fight. It was Jordan's Bulls. They were brand new, terrible team. You didn't have Pippen, you know what I mean, for those series, and Bird's teams were awesome.
Now, stopping the clip right there, Nick Wright had some pretty cute theories, saying why Jordan hated the Pistons is because those teams beat him in the playoffs. And while that is true, the main reason and the real factor of why Jordan hates Isiah is because those Pistons teams were dirty and went over line when it came to defense. And looking at Isiah, he was the unquestioned leader of Detroit, he was their instigator, and the guy behind the scenes pulling the strings for the bad boy Pistons. And looking at someone like Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and the bad boys enforcers, those guys for Isiah were basically hitmen sent out to punish Michael Jordan. I think it's pretty universal. If you have 2 guys trying to kill you and take your head off, and take pleasure in doing so, you're not going to like those guys or the one guy behind them telling them to do so. And I do find it pretty hilarious Nick Wright, in under 20 seconds, debunks his own theory. As Jordan versus the Boston Celtics, just like versus Isiah, did not have a winning record. And actually Jordan versus Boston and Larry Bird never won one game when it came to the playoffs. And looking at someone like Larry Bird back in the 80s, why Jordan didn't hate him, despite losing to him, is because Boston wasn't nearly as dirty as Detroit. And let's be honest for 1 second, when it comes to hating the Pistons, that was an entire NBA thing, not just Jordan and the Bulls. The Celtics hated them, the Lakers hated them, superstars hated them, benchwarmers hated them, the fans hated them, even the NBA commissioner. And looking back at Nick Wright for 1 second, one more lie he told is that Jordan vs. the Pistons was a fair fight, and Jordan vs. Bird and the Celtics was not. Now look, when it comes to Jordan vs. Bird, that was one guy versus 5 Hall of Famers, and Nick in that regard is correct. But when it comes to Detroit, in those first 2 series Jordan played them, it was far from a fair series. And looking at 1988, Jordan's first time playing the Pistons in the playoffs, this series was far from a fair fight, as Jordan individually averaged 27, 9, and 5, led his team in points, assists, steals, and was second in rebounds. For that series, he had no teammate average above 13 points per game, he had no all-star help, and his best teammate was Sam Vincent, a career backup who played for the Boston Celtics. And looking at someone like Scottie Pippen, he was on this team, but he was a lowly rookie, averaging 9 points per game. Detroit at this point went 6 guys deep and had tons of great talent, from Isiah Thomas, Adrian Dantley, Joe Dumars, Bill Laimbeer, Vinnie Johnson, all the way till Dennis Rodman. And before you guys say it, this Pistons team was not old, something Nick Wright loves to state. As looking at all those players, not one of them was above the age of 32, and most of them were in their mid to late 20s. Adding that very important context, this 88 series was far from a fair fight. And looking at Jordan's second matchup versus the Pistons in 89, this once again was a lopsided matchup, as Jordan in the series averaged 37 and 6, leading his team in points, assists, as well as steals. His best teammate for the series was Craig Hodges, a spot-up 3-point shooter. And once again, Scottie Pippen, he was a sophomore, but far from a great player, averaging 10 points per game on barely above 40% shooting. Michael Jordan, basically going solo, took this Pistons team to 6 games, and handed them their only 2 losses of the entire playoffs. And once again, this Pistons team was all-time great, having the best record in the East, having a top 10 defense, top 10 offense, had 4 All-Stars, plus Dennis Rodman. This right here is the little lies Nick Wright throws in that go unnoticed, ignored, or simply unchecked. And I hope with that very quick breakdown, you guys understand, Jordan vs. Detroit, those first 2 series, it was not a fair fight and an even matchup.
Isiah played him 4 times in the playoffs, won 3 of those series. Overall, the record's 12-10. Yes, Jordan got the last one, and they swept him that year. But Isiah was not on a super team. Now, I'm not disrespecting the Pistons. You know the respect I have for those teams. But there wasn't another superstar there. There wasn't another top 50 player there. Now, there was top 75 because they put Rodman on there, but he wasn't there originally.
So, stopping Nick right there, I want to clarify, when it comes to quote-unquote super teams, that phrase is highly subjective. And when it comes to a universal rule of what a super team is, I would say everyone says the 80s Lakers and the 80s Celtics were indeed super teams, as they had multiple All-Stars, great defense, high-powered offense, as well as a Hall of Fame coach. So when Nick throws out terms like top 75 or top 50 all-time, those things, in the grand scheme of things, they mean nothing. And I do want to hammer it home, terms like top 75 and top 50 are ranking individuals and not teams. For example, the 2016 Warriors technically weren't a super team by Knicks standards, as on that roster, they only had 1 top 75 player en route to winning 73 games. Now look, for Nick Wright, he classifies that Golden State team as a super team and a crowning achievement for LeBron James and his overall career. And we'll even go as far as saying LeBron winning that championship counts as 2 rings. That right there alone exposes Nick Wright, his hypocrisy, and his double standards. But looking past that, when it comes to Detroit Pistons in the bad boy era, from 87 to 91, this team was eerily close, if not a super team, by most fans' standards. As in 88, they beat Larry Bird's Celtics, who were a top team in the Eastern Conference, still had a big 3, and the following year in 89, beat Magic's Lakers, who also had a big 3. And looking at the Pistons roster individually, Isiah Thomas, during this time period, was a 5-time All-Star, 1-time Finals MVP, and the second best point guard, only behind Magic. At shooting guard, you had Joe Dumars, a 2-time All-Star, 3-time All-Defensive, and 1-time Finals MVP in his 5-year gap. And defensively, you had Dennis Rodman, a 3-time All-Defensive player, a 1-time All-Star, and back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year. And of course, the enforcer, you had Bill Laimbeer, was a 1-time All-Star during this 5-year period. Those 4 guys right there on their own could classify as an NBA super team. But looking at the rest of the roster, you also had Mark Aguirre, who prior to being traded was a 2-time All-Star, averaging 25 points per game. On the Pistons, he was more of a heat check player, averaging around 15. And of course, on the bench, we had the ultimate heat check player, that being Vinnie Johnson, who was a top tier 6-man during this 5-year time period. And before I forget, their coach was a Hall of Famer in Chuck Daly, who was picked to coach the Dream Team. If this team right here isn't a super team, I don't know what is.
Isiah's the one guy that played in Jordan's prime in his era that Jordan knows, he would never admit it, but that Isiah can look him in the eye and say, I got the better of you.
I find this clip pretty funny for a couple of reasons. As Nick Wright, he's one of the big pushers that team accomplishments don't matter in the grand scheme of things. But when it comes to Isiah Thomas versus Michael Jordan, winning games, winning championships, and especially series, they somehow matter to Nick Wright. Compare that to someone like LeBron James. When LeBron makes the finals or wins the Eastern Conference, that is deemed a LeBron accomplishment. But less than 3 weeks later, when LeBron loses that final series, that is deemed a team failure and not a LeBron failure. I hope by now Nick Wright is thoroughly exposed and his double standards are definitely highlighted. And looking back at Isiah and Jordan versus the Pistons, no matter how good their defense was, still dominated. averaging 31 points, having 9 40-point games, 1 50-point game, and 1 game scoring 60. And compared to Isiah, he leads him in points, rebounds, steals, blocks, field goal percentage, 3 percentage, as well as free throw percentage. Michael Jordan versus the Bad Boy Pistons thoroughly dominated them from an individual perspective. And contrary to popular belief, those first 2 series versus Detroit were not fair fights like I showed you guys. And my last point for this video isn't even about Jordan or Isiah Thomas. It's about Nick Wright. As in less than a minute clip, he lied at least 5 times, left context out 1,000,000 times, and contorted logic to the nth degree. This guy right here is a used car salesman of NBA analysts. So with that being said, that is the end of the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.